First off, I know I give off big energy. This is my first time being on camera. I was actually the guy who cast the
Mm.
hosts at MTV back in the day. So I've always been like this close to some of the biggest storytellers that had to pass through television. Like, what a killer time for me to be at MTV from 1998 to 2007.
Right? And when you can communicate with people correctly, then you can know what they want, how you can help, how they can help you, and you just build better relationships. And it sounds like you severely developed your communication skills to like a whole nother level, right?
Yo, there's some
Um,
trauma, yo.
all right, welcome back, everybody, to another great episode. I have an awesome guest. His name is Vinny. He has done a lot of great stuff in the media space, creative space. He was on MTV as a host for a while, and he is now dabbling into the podcast realm, and he seems to be going full fledged ahead. Um, and Vinny, would you mind sharing a little bit more about yourself and maybe some of the crazy stuff you've been up to?
Yeah, I appreciate that. First off, I know I give off big energy. This is my first time being on camera. I was actually the guy who cast the
Mm.
hosts at MTV back in the day. So I've always been like this close to some of the biggest storytellers that had to pass through television. Like, what a killer time for me to be at MTV from 1998 to 2007.
Mm.
I got there when it was like MTV Rock and Jocks, the MTV Sports and Music Festivals. Like, we're dropping skateboarders off helicopters at the Hard Rock, and like, you
Wow.
don't even realize. By the way, you don't even realize. If I'm thinking about this, you don't even realize the relationships you're making as you're making them.
Mm.
It was, I think it was like a sports and music festival. It was usually in Las Vegas, and we ended up finding out that TJ Lavin had this backyard with a lot of dunes and stuff that we could ride on,
Mhm.
and we wanted like this like backyard barbecue kind of experience.
Uh-huh.
So a small crew went over, and I remember we shot in his backyard, and he tells the story really nicely over like breakfast tacos, and apparently I was like cleaning. I was sweet. He says I was sweeping the backyard because that could be me trying to like impress him and make sure we're tidy because like we're very
Uh-huh.
messy in production.
Right.
So it would be me, the guy whose relationship it is to be with talent, to think, well, this isn't how we should leave it.
Mhm.
Um, but it was a killer relationship like that. That 3 or 4 years later, when the challenge came out, and then
Mm.
ultimately they were looking for an athlete. First, it was TJ Mosley. Mosley? Not TJ Mosley. Dave Mosley? Why? No, Dave Mira.
Mm.
What's the? Why am I? Oh my god! An
I have no idea.
Olympian skier. Oh my gosh, this is horrible. This is the burst. Anyway, and we ended up hiring TJ Lavin. I think like season 7, and he's done like 40 or so seasons so
Wow.
far. Which has been killer, by the way, to know that like I got the old guy on MTV 20 years. By the way, also on that network, Nick Cannon came to MTV when I was there, and
Yeah.
while I learned a lot from that kid, man. While and Out was the show that he pitched hard and people didn't get, and they passed on it, and he actually invested in himself. It's like a big lesson I like actually talking about. He invested in himself. He went out and spent money and created tape so he could show us what it looked like with two teams and two celebrities. At that point, he was dating Christina Milian, so
Mm.
you had access to talent. You have access to
Right.
comedians. He had access to a space, by the way, that wasn't being used overnight, so he recorded it quickly. And that's also like one of those franchises that like was built to tap into like young comedic talent. And when you build something that has that goal greater than the end of the episode, like those are the sustainable media franchises that
Right.
I've been lucky to be a part of, a couple more than a dozen of those successful franchises that have run for more than 10 years or so. And uh, I think all that I see in common, their goals far exceeded the end of the episode. And if anything, the faces of those platforms became the faces. I was going to say the faces of the shows became the faces of those platforms.
Right.
And I
I
think I look at that, what I went through, the way that, but to be honest, they're all solo entrepreneurs when you're an artist.
Mhm.
Mandy Moore at 15, she's an independent business owner of one. She's
Right.
got a team, a manager, but she's got no employees. Not
Mhm.
until, by the way, and she gets the gig at NBC, and now she has a production deal, and now she has a staff and team. But I
Right.
got to see people incrementally add those opportunities. Ashton Kutcher, Sharon Osbourne, Ashley, and Jessica Simpson. Incrementally watch them grow, leveraging their story, the power of that. And it's like, again, I'm like awestruck that I'm at MTV for that long. And I love talking about it, not because I'm nostalgic, because it's like a shared experience. Like, I hope someone listening to it has a son, a daughter, they themselves, they know someone who had to go home and watch TRL,
Mhm.
or you remember when what we did to Justin Timberlake on Punk'd, and these moments that kind of brought communities together. They combined audiences. It was something that was bigger than the network. And I get excited about what we and the independent voices can create now and own. That's the cool
Mhm.
stuff.
So do you still keep in touch with, the people you've, networked across your time at MTV?
I do, yeah,
Mhm.
and a lot of them are my guests on my podcast. I have a podcast, so like I use I have a podcast as a space to go back in time to put some context to what I saw, what I witnessed. A lot of it
Yeah.
wasn't on social media, so I didn't have the ability to get a reaction and have peer-to-peer reaction and peer-to-peer feedback the way that we get right now. A lot of it was done in a vacuum,
Right.
especially on a celebrity level. So it's awesome, so awesome to talk to Mandy Moore about when she gets the phone call for Princess Diaries, and they wanted her to do this scene where she would be like this like super teeny bopper at spring break, and
Mhm.
like 3 weeks before that phone call, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm going to tell the story. But 3 weeks before that phone call, 16-year-old Mandy Moore at the real MTV Spring Break singing her really pretty her really pretty song, but in front of 18 to 25-year-old drunk dudes that have been drinking all day. It was a
Oh gosh.
horrifying
Yeah.
experience, man. And she's like, "No, this was my chance to like have the version of Spring Break that I wanted." And like, now that's the one that will be etched in people's memory. And I was like, how cool a thing. Like, I just remember like, oh, what are we doing with this 16-year-old on the stage, and this energy that's out here. And look, you look at Britney Spears and some of these women back then, you understand what the media, could do. Again, um, I think what Mandy did right was she had a very transparent team. I
Mm.
actually used to get in trouble for telling her too much because they're like, you can't tell her everything. I'm like, yeah, she needs to know everything. I have a sister and a brother who are also her age. I have a younger brother and sister born in 84, 85. That millennial audience is something that I've been programmed to entertain,
Mm.
engage, inspire,
Right.
ignite, blame, celebrate everything with, because that's
Right.
like that's who my even now I have a cool sort of podcast industry thing that I'm doing, and my sister gets to produce a couple of projects with me every once in a while, and it's like the coolest thing because we
That's
used to do
awesome.
that with like growing up, and it's cool. It's cool how podcast fractures the economy. I appreciate the podcast economy for what it is,
Yeah.
but it's cool how podcasting fractures the economy.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think something that's not really talked about in this creative space is the importance of soft skills, right? When you're trying to achieve success, monetary success, career success, it's all about hard skills. It's all about, either way, it's all about networking, like you were saying. But I think soft skills is something that is often not talked about enough. And someone who's just kind of entered the career world and everything, I've noticed how valuable soft skills can be, um, and no one ever told me they were gonna be valuable. I guess, just lucked out and, developed my soft skills, and, it's much easier to communicate with people, right? And when you can communicate with people correctly, then you can know what they want, how you can help, how they can help you, and you just build better relationships, and it sounds like you severely developed your communication skills to, like, a whole 'nother level, right?
Yo, there's some
Um
trauma, yo. You don't
That's
get
a
these
good
superpowers. You either get bit by a
I love
spider,
right.
right, or like the superpowers come from somewhere.
Yeah.
No, I'm lucky. Again, I turn to my siblings. I'm so lucky that like I became a people pleaser. because I can do
Mm.
anything for my siblings and I can make things happen for them that my parents couldn't because they just weren't around for whatever reasons. So that's part of where I can put people way before me. I can show up for people before myself. It's actually something I have to.
Mhm.
Part of me being a guest on podcasts is actually showing up for me, which is a really hard thing to do. To be really honest, it's almost as hard as like cooking for one. Think of it's so much
Right.
easier to cook for like two or four because like it's for some
Yeah.
reason, but cooking for one, you're like, oh, maron, like
Yeah. Maybe
am
it's
I
like
worth the
lack of
45 minutes it takes to make the
right.
meatballs? And then I really want gluten free, so I gotta get exactly 8 minutes. And
Yeah.
like,
Maybe there's like a
um,
little bit of like when you're alone, it's you don't have that pressure of accountability, right? It's
yeah,
like you're like, the meatballs are overcooked a little bit, but who cares, right? You're just gonna
yeah,
eat it anyways.
exactly. Yeah,
Versus
yeah,
like if you're trying to, especially if it's like a first or if it was an important date or important
yeah.
somebody, right? You're
Family,
gonna
yeah.
family, you're gonna be like, oh, these are overcooked. I'm gonna start over, right? And
Sacre bleu! Back to the kitchen.
right.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, right. Cool. I'm glad that I'm pleased to hear that you can relate to that emotion and that I am not alone in
Mm,
that. It's something I really struggle with,
mhm,
and it shows up in weird ways. It shows up being on time. Sometimes it shows up being prepared on time. I used to go through this phase where I really loved quote unquote being unprepared because I thought it put me in my best place ever. um, and there may be some truth and accountability. There may be some truth to that, depending on the specific circumstance, but not all circumstances. And but that being said, I also didn't have a lot of to minimize my uh, disappointment in people. I learned to not want things. So when you don't want things, you learn to not celebrate things. So for
mm,
me, I sold a TV show, but that's what I'm supposed to do. So how many episodes is it? And like, or the TV show failed and it's like no one watched it. And I'm like, well, that's also what happens with TV shows. Like,
yeah.
now is that going to be my fault? Or it goes, there's so many things out of your control. And I love
Mm.
that part. I loved learning. Are you kidding? With the one percenters in Viacom, MTV, CBS, when I was there, we launched MTV Trace, MTV2, MTV.com, MTV Films, MTV Desi, MTV, I
Mhm.
mean, 35 international platforms. And I got to help them scale a
Wow.
talent development department. I helped them scale. It's really cool that HR executives are called talent development. This is like awesome on LinkedIn. Confusing, but that's
Uh-huh.
okay because usually 20 years ago when you typed in casting, you would get like fish rods, not my profession either. So like I've
Right.
always been like a page two ranker,
Right.
first working in cable and then podcasts and always in
Uh,
unpreferred media, social media in the middle
right.
too, right? No, everyone's. But I think when I call, people expect two things: one, an opportunity, and then two, to do something. I never
Mm,
had the relationship with talent producers or a community where I called and said, "Hey, I'm just here to let you promote something. Hop on. I'm here to say let's create something big that ignites a larger conversation, and the two of us can ignite and create and develop something that allows us to have deeper, meaningful impact with our community, with our audiences, with ourselves."
mm,
As we talk
right.
about legacies, I say ourselves. Now I'm in the podcast game, so everyone talks about legacies. I don't know. I didn't.
Yeah, that is true. I've
I
heard
don't. I
that
didn't.
buzzword a lot.
I didn't like. As a kid, no one talked to me about my legacy. Like all of a sudden, like no,
You just
really.
heard it
Like,
in
and
cartoons.
also like maybe it's like a money. Like yeah. Like so sometimes legacy is like a little bit like financial legacy more of
Mm.
that. So like maybe maybe that's why it wasn't talked about in my house because that was like not even a possibility or whatever. I remember
Mm,
graduating college thinking 19,000 a year was like a lot for someone to make because that's what my single parent made
mhm,
in the house of the us four children made. And to be really honest, it was a database. I'm a data geek, so I started off in like just coding and HTML, and I would build CPUs. And my first business I thought was going to be to like build computers specifically for universities
mhm,
because I spent so much time in the computer center.
What
And
exactly did you do? Were you in data science?
so I technically graduated college with a business degree in theater arts,
Uh-huh.
programming more than anything else. So,
Mhm.
at that point, we're literally learning HTML, SQL, learning how to be. So I figured out, not I figured out, but I learned how to use macros in Excel to auto-populate and generate content. I took out an ad one day my senior year in college, and this thing called Backstage, which is where like non-union actors go to look for opportunities, actors, dancers, whatever. And I said, like, if you're interested in being in future projects, send me your headshot and resume. Vinnie Potestivo, One Campus Road, Student Box 577. Like, I know LLC. I'm like, I'm not even, who's going to send this to me? But I just needed information because I wanted to create a database with
Mhm.
some names and information. And I got like, I don't know, under 700 headshots sent to me at school. And I took that database, and every week I would look at Backstage, which was free. Well,
Mhm.
Backstage at that point was a physical paper that you actually had to buy from, like, I don't know, 25 specific kiosks in Times Square. Like, it was a very specific regional paper. So I knew if I took it and scanned it in and sent it to those people who I thought might not have access to it, that they would find that interesting. Fox News found out that I had this database
Mm.
as I was sending it out to database. Fox News, brand new network. They had the show Hannity and Combs. So I got hired as like an audience producer to tour the country in 98,
Wow.
99 with Hannity and Combs. And my job was to organize the audience and then figure out what questions should come from the audience and help pick, that, and set that up for the producers and the casting director that worked on that show. And then it was MTV News that found out. And then you do one thing in New York, people talk, bada bing. Then
Bada
MTV,
bing.
the one guy, that's, well, back then I think it's actually the freelance economy too. Then maybe the casting director went to MTV, and long story short, they were in the process of creating the talent development department. They needed someone to organize. I used to do those shows, Wanna Be a VJ. I don't know if you remember, like, the MTV had like these, like, thousands of people nationwide would compete to be a host on MTV to introduce
Mm.
videos and be on TRL. And there was my little database in action. And then I got to cast Choose or Lose, which was scout completely finding a whole new MTV news team.
Mm.
That was awesome. And when the talent development department came to be, I had some soft skills, which you just mentioned, and I had some hard skills. I had some hard
Right.
tech skills. I knew how to wire two VCRs
Yeah.
together to edit from my office. That was something that at MTV they were still spending thousands of dollars on beta before they could even think of digitizing and doing it that way. I know I had my databases, which was how I would create all of my talent grids. And it's
Mm.
crazy to think that everyone's term papers and all this shit that I edited back in the day, I used all that inspiration for like show pitches and casting one sheets and
Uh-huh.
reality show decks, and why all of my financial content has serif font, and
Right.
all the comedic stuff is sans serif. It's like, it's funny to think about where some of that inspo where I'm triggered with Comic
Yeah.
Sans since
Well, I feel
98.
like even your hard skills allow you to develop, like, better on your soft skills and
Yeah,
creativity, right? Because, like,
yeah,
for
my
example,
tools, those are my
the more,
tools.
right, the better you know your tools, the better you know how to use them, right?
Yeah,
And if you know how to use your tools, you can create some pretty cool things. So I
it's true. You're saying that, I have
yeah.
this vision of like picking up a sword, and it's this YouTube video of the guy picks up the sword and instantly like cuts his finger off because he didn't realize how sharp the ones, like, he, I don't know. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm actually terrified of tools that I'm not a master of. And when I
Yeah.
feel masterful over a tool, that's where I get excited about sharing it with people. When I figure out, for example, do you have a blog that's connected to your podcast?
Uh, will
Or
be, but at the moment, no.
awesome. Okay,
Mhm.
so here's a great reason to have a blog that supports every podcast episode, is
Mm,
because I realize that you can take that blog RSS and upload it to Google News, and you can be
mm,
a Google News verified source, so that other platforms, other podcasts, magazines, e-magazines, our friend
mhm.
can RSS, can pull you're basically syndicating your content on the web to other platforms, and that's a great way for link backs. And then once you do, what's that?
I was gonna say you should. I don't know if you're already doing this, but you should add transcripts too, because the
Oh
Google
yeah.
SEO, when you're it doesn't search audio or video. So for example, let's say you talk about how to tie your shoes, and it's just a video or audio, and someone looks up how to tie your shoes. They're not going to see yours unless you have some sort of transcript where Google can physically read words.
Yeah,
So
that's
that's a
brilliant.
that's a good way.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's important to have in there. By the way, if you're doing that, then I want to throw in the aggregation part that I think some people forget about in the content distribution hierarchy. Aggregation is the act of culling, curating. Like I'm going to a free account and I want how-to videos on shoe tying. And when I sit down, I want 5 blogs about. I want to read 5 blogs about shoe tying. And when I sit down, there they are because AI and people tell me that. And the benefit of those 5 blogs being discovered at a point in time where you're going to do one of 3 things: you're going to read it, and you're going to share it, or you're not going to read it and you're still going to share it because it's like-minded content. You need the content output for the day, and you just want to share someone else's content that you may align with.
Right.
I can get you into that system. Getting into that aggregator is a killer way for your content to be discovered without needing the added layer of branding and marketing and artwork and all the sort of stuff that we do at the top of the podcast to get quote unquote more visible,
Mhm.
right?
The big
Um,
bucks.
yeah, right. If
Right.
I can make you more visible on a platform where people are looking for you, you don't need more visibility to have more discoverability. You need more shareability to have more discoverability, right? So you don't need to be more visible to get discovered. You need more sharing after people see you, after you've been visible. That's what leads to discovery. That's inspired action. That's like that's top of funnel, speeding down to conversion
Yeah.
kind of energy. And if you can set them up. That's what I realized. We're just not creating innately, we're not creating content necessarily that's easy to share,
You're right.
small pieces that's easy to share, or even long pieces. By the way, I noticed that Google has these snippets that are pulling data from our web pages, and snippets are a way that Google kind of puts like a magnifying glass on your web page in the context of search results. And Google, I realize, has a snippet for blogs that are over 3,000 words. So it's not
Oh.
just short form content like most of social media that we're
Mhm.
repurposing into Google is. But so now I'm mindful of the fact that I need to have at least one 3,000 word article or something. And by the way,
Right.
your strategy about transcription could certainly
Will
help me
work,
get those
right.
numbers. By the way,
Yeah,
yeah, right.
yeah.
Like that's like
3,000 can be a lot sometimes.
yeah, that's what's that? 15 minutes.
Yeah.
If you're on with a New Yorker, or most of us listen on high speed now, right? Anyway,
Yeah,
so
right.
1.5.
I wanna also touch base on what you were speaking of earlier, and it kind of reminded me of this idea of humility, and because you were talking about knowing yourself and, your interactions with people, and I think a big, at least from what I've learned and what I've seen, is some people, right, when they get to the top, they get this, ego where it's like, "Oh, well, I'm at the top, I know everything." And sometimes those are the people that kind of fall, right? Because when you stop adapting and stop learning and you start thinking, "Oh, I know it all," then, time, the market, evolution, it just kind of wipes you out if you're not adapting constantly. So, I've noticed like you were kind of talking about humility, kind of reminded me of that and how that can be really important. I did want to ask, like, did you ever, I'm sure you have, when you're working at MTV, encounter people that had a lot of humility and people that didn't? And like, what was that like interacting with either?
Oh yeah, sure.
Uh
Well, the flip side of the answer is like the drama queens,
huh.
the Mariah Carey moments, the Diddy moments, many Diddy moments. I worked very closely on making the band. In fact, yeah, there's I would we would shoot sometimes we would shoot a scene and like in some of the casting stuff, yeah. Plenty of Diddy moments. He would even know Tia Rebel was on live, so he would just show up live, and he did it like the Diddy takeover, and like yeah, the cool thing about working with disruptive talent and cooperative talent is passion and
Mhm.
understanding that power can sometimes get you in the room and get you out of the room, Kanye. So you know what I
That's
mean?
true,
Like,
that
and
is
I
true.
understand that now.
Mhm.
Power can get you in the room. Passion can get you in the room. It can also be misjudged as emotion and dismissed for that reason. And I'm sensitive to those two words because I find myself be I find those two words being associated with how I'm able to get projects greenlit, moved, purchased, created, sourced, distributed, synchronous, whatever
Mhm.
out there. It comes from, and right now the power's in the people, so that's why I'm all in on podcasting because what we're doing now, I mean, we all know the original reality TV shows, right? So
Yeah,
like, and
right, right.
even the ones that came 10 years later, the Housewives, and like they had a wife, and then 20 years later, everyone's on. So we know that this reinvent. So we the people have the ability to have our stories amplified at that level because we're expanding in
Yeah.
this growing market. It's not growing around us. That's why I left MTV. All of a sudden, I
Mhm.
looked around in 2007. I'm like, oh, so everyone with an iPhone is now create like we all have access. So actually, I remember even Facebook. I used to have to hide my friends because I didn't want people to see who my friends were because they were like they would go to my site and they would see who the real kids from Laguna Beach were or whatever show I worked on, and then they would
Right.
reach out to them and people would say, "Vin, do you ever get weirded out or upset or mad that like everyone recasts all the people you cast? Like you found all these people. You ever?" I'm like,
Uh-huh.
"What? I would never think of it that way. Imagine I get to be part of all of this and I didn't have to do anything. I take mental credit, but also they give me so much credit. TJ, that guy TJ Lavin, there's not a single GQ interview he's ever given that GQ doesn't call me up for a follow up quote or advice. And like he's so
Mhm.
generous, and every step of his ladder to success, he's turned around and said, like, I'd be nowhere without you. I'm like, dude, this is the coolest brotherhood I could ever imagine. What I wanted at that moment with an athlete, because MTV at that point in 04, 03, ESPN2 took all of the male viewers away from MTV. There was no more
Mm.
sports and music festival, no more
Right.
rock and jock anything.
Mm.
It wasn't even fashion programming anymore. It just quickly turned lifestyle and then life, real life,
Right, right.
and it was hard. It was hard to get an athlete on MTV. It was easier on MTV2. There seemed to be more of a male sensibility, skewing
Mhm.
sensibility on that platform. But someone who could represent to the youth culture had the challenge. It's called the challenge to challenge your physical and mental strength.
Yeah.
That's like cool. And then I never thought it would still be the same like 40-year-olds that are
Right.
still competing in these awards later. I love that part. That's the bonus. God bless them. I don't fall. I don't fall gracefully the way they fall.
Right.
No, it hurt. No.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, also when you were speaking about, Nick Cannon's story, I think that's so inspirational that he took a chance on himself, right? And kinda like your story, he developed the hard skills while at work and, working at MTV and all that and gaining the knowledge and the skill set, and then once he got the, confidence to say, I think I'm gonna place the bet on myself if MTV is not gonna do it." Um, that's super inspiring because, that's not easy. And I think people, really brush past people's successes like that when you hear it like, "Oh, yeah, Nick Cannon did this and this happened." And it's like, "Oh, and he's successful now." But to think of where he probably was mindset-wise, financially, everything in that moment was probably a whole nother ballgame, right? The idea of
Yeah.
truly taking a bet on yourself is much harder to do than to say. Yeah.
Well, I'll say this: what he had going, and this is maybe even the same thing with Mandy Moore. He was
Mhm.
treated as an adult. As a child, he had, by the way, a giant star at Nickelodeon, and he was crystal clear. That kid's vision, that dude's vision is like there is nothing. Everyone's surprised about like the number of children. There's obviously some interesting headlines about him, but there's nothing that he does, that he is surprised by. He is so intentional. He
Mhm.
always has had this level of clarity. I think that's what made him so funny and so relevant as a comedian. When you can really see what's funny, when you can see
Mhm.
through the fluff and the PC and the not PC and every, when
Yeah.
you have that level of clarity, you can really perform and execute at a high level. He's had the same team around him since day one. It's that level of clarity that I think helps him, execute it. And then I love that story because it worked out. You know what I mean? I know lots of
Mhm.
other people who didn't, and Nick had a
Right.
lot at that point to lose because, uh, to be honest, he was supposed he there was a Carson was not no longer on TRL, and if I remember correctly, I think Nick was supposed to kind of be the host of TRL, and then I think that Nick really truly passionately felt connected to Wild 'N Out, and
Mm.
no, I was gonna say he made it so that he was no longer going to be the host of
Mhm.
TRL, which then opened the door for me to go hire and go find, and our team got to go find uh, the last generation sort of VJs. There was about like five or six that had this
Mhm.
rotation, and then that pushback allowed us in the deal that we already had with Nick Cannon, in the space that we already had, some time to figure it out, and I think Nick invested in himself right at the right time where he knew he could take it to another network after showing it to us. But it was how he leveraged it, and really, I think truly that show was really an awesome. At that point in time, I don't know what other network would have supported it the way that MTV could have, with the
Right.
amount of eyeballs that we had on us. Maybe
Right.
CW, but it would have been a different type of show and a very different distribution model, than
Mhm.
what MTV was capable of globally.
Right.
So if they
Yeah.
wanted to release albums at the end of every episode, CW would have been an awesome place to go. That's, by the way, Nick Cannon, you should have pitched us Glee, the Glee version of Wild 'N Out, man. That's what you got to come back. Every
Right.
episode should. That's
Uh,
so awesome. I say that I laugh now. Watch him come out with
uh,
that like tomorrow. It's so intentional. It's really cool when you have that level of clarity. They all do, by the way.
Mm.
They have that level of clarity
Conviction.
yeah, where they're like, I need the show to be a success because of XYZ needs to happen. Jessica Simpson didn't need newlyweds to happen. She needed it to kick off and catapult. Ultimately, she played Daisy in Daisy Dukes, in Dukes of Hazzard. That's a pretty big. That might, to be honest. I mean, I know MTV tries to take a lot of credit, or maybe I
Right.
think MTV takes credit. Yeah, MTV takes no credit for anything else other than Jersey Shore these days. I'm still the only person who brings up Osbournes and Punked and these things that Anyway, they're but we have, again, all that to be said is like that. That's why I believe now this like free world of IP, of creating, where we can get our stories out there and own it. I'm telling you the value of I know how valuable our content is because I saw dozens of production companies get sold based on other people's stories just
Mhm.
10 years ago. Imagine what we're going to be capable of doing. That's how valuable our stories are. And if you're a business owner, the story of your collective talent and how your talent tells your story and how
Mhm.
you're part of your talent story is never been more important. And by the time you figure out what I'm trying to talk about, if this is going over your head, in 3 or 4 years from now, it's going to be too late because the world is getting bigger, and these messages and these formats are going with it.
Mhm.
So that's my
Right.
spiel.
And speaking on that, ever growing and changing culture, you know, we have ups and downs as a culture, whether it's economics and such, right? So I want to ask you, because you left around '07, and '08 was a huge year in the US. How did and I'm asking this because I'm relating it to what I saw in 2020 was, a lot more content was consumed, and I'm sure
Mhm.
you noticed it. A lot more YouTubers, gained. I think some people gained million, like 600, 800,000 subscribers in like 8 months, like crazy numbers. So definitely, the COVID and the lockdowns had a change on how content was consumed. I'm wondering, was there a change in content consumption in '08, and how so?
Yeah, yeah, in a big way, by the way. And in '08, two things happened simultaneously. unparalleled to each other, but happened at the same time. One, obviously, suddenly a lot of people found themselves at home watching television with the time to consume content. Technologies are just coming out now, most of
Mm.
it rolling out on our iPhones and Androids and flip phones, I think, if we're talking about oh 07, oh 08 maybe.
Yeah.
So we're not, it's not a fun experience. It's not long form content. The buffering speeds are low. We're still reliant on television at that point. And
Right.
in oh 08, what happened was there was a big writer strike, and that
Mm.
writer strike stopped all of written programming. Anything that was a script that needed acting and writing from the from a what's the word, not uh not the Directors Guild, but like the associate. What is it? I forget the Writers Association. But anyway, but
Okay.
if they're not, union writers writing on these union projects, that then productions couldn't go in. So suddenly, I had access to dozens, and then ultimately everyone, and then dozens of production companies had access to hundreds of actors and talent and people who otherwise would have been committed and busy on other projects. So there
Mm.
was a tremendous influx of content creation on a network level, which is a first big boom to the content economy, beyond just like independent channels slowly starting to get it, because it quickly
Right.
became about bidding over talent. It was about the loudest voice wins, the most recognized face can, bring eyeballs to the network. At that point, television is about growth. At that point, we're leveraging faces and hoping that that's bringing us new eyeballs. I think the
Right.
difference now, well, first off, we haven't had a writer strike. There hasn't been an influx of premium talent. Let's call it that way. Or I don't know what to call it. How about no? I take it back. I take it because we're the premium creators are the premium talent now. So I'm looking back at this. There's the real people economy, the influencer economy, the creator economy. I think we're going to be hitting like the editor curator economy maybe next. Maybe like that.
Mm.
That's maybe where people who
You
have the ability to curate and cull through content and trusted sources. I think that
mm.
this is where I can see more podcast networks being aligned. I also
Right.
will throw this out, by the way. Think about this. Think about ESPN2 as not just a place to watch sports, but a place to listen to sports podcasts. What's stopping ESPN2 from launching the ESPN2 podcast directory the same way
Mhm.
Apple has a directory and the same way Spotify one? And by the way,
Yeah.
I'm sure the same way Walgreens and Kmart and I'm sure
Everyone's gonna have
everyone
a
will still be in a
podcast, yeah.
directory. It's a directory. It's a pass through, by the way.
Mhm.
It's data. There's not even a single file. It's just
Yeah.
information that's pointing to each other. So
I think
imagine if you
Amex just started a podcast.
Yeah, see, look at this. You're
Yeah.
gonna, you're gonna everywhere. Pew 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 pew. Gas.
Yeah.
Imagine gas stations on the go. Here's our 5 podcasts, and here's
Yeah.
how it works. By the way, oh my gosh, this is so cool. So if you aren't launching a podcast network as a business, and if you're looking for ways to leverage content that you're not creating, I want to give you a peek into what I think Bravo is doing. I think
Mm.
Bravo, has contracts with the housewives, and those contracts say that women have to get appearances approved. Anything about an interviewing of their story on podcast needs to get approved. So podcast gates who the women can and cannot speak to. And
Mhm.
ultimately, if you look at like 24 1 hour episodes in one season, that's 24 hours of content that Bravo is going to produce. By the way, probably lots more, including the sizzles and the bonuses and all the but 24 core hours of content, right? If they have 100 podcasters in line waiting to talk to those women afterwards, how many thousands of hours are they
Yeah.
getting out of each of those podcasters for
Yep.
every episode? And they're not paying for content, and they're happy to oblige and connect. By the way, they did this thing called BravoCon. They podcasters got flown in and got to meet talent. So like
Right.
I'm like, yo, if you better don't get gassed,
Yeah.
you better get some money on this. And I said that, and then I realized that those podcasters have ads, and those ads are similar to the ads they'll see on NBC Network. So it makes no surprise to me if Bravo had figured out a way to share their talent network, their content network, their advertising network.
Mm,
Like these are the separate types of networks that ultimately make up some of these larger media platforms,
right.
NBC, CBS, that we know. I like pointing that out because when you understand the distribution system, maybe we could even be looking at our own internal comms, the way that we're, the way that I might give a keynote at my next town hall might be in a way where I know 1 minute of it is intended to be funny because that's the moment I need to put on the company, you know what I mean, or the quick piece, so that I can be intentional. I know I'm going to need to advertise it. I know I'm going to need to promote it. It shouldn't come as this. I hate repurposing. Pre-purpose, you gotta. So
Yeah.
create it while you're doing it. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah,
you
right.
gotta. So
That's so true, like, I guess I didn't even realize that, right? Like, the power of leveraging other people's work. It's like a win-win, right? So, for example, you're on this podcast, and I post the video version, the audio version, let's say a blog, a written thing here, some shorts or clips or segments. Let's say there's about 10 pieces of just this one, interaction of us, right? That power of, you spent an hour and leveraged, like, you're able to leverage way more, uh, through people's work. I think that's just crazy because it's like a win-win almost, is the way I see it.
yeah, and then
Mhm,
what I want to do is I want to ask you, like 100 days after this airs on your podcast, would you ever be open to maybe me running this episode, this actual file on my podcast? Because I
mm,
think that my audience would love to hear the way you're talking to me and the questions
mhm.
you're asking me. And like the characters don't change, the facts don't change, but the story changes based on who I'm talking to, who's coming up. I'm answering questions here,
Yeah, that's actually kinda cool cool because your audience gets
right?
to hear you, speak more and less of the questioning, more of the, giving your take, which I think would be super cool.
And what I do is I create a Google News blog post
Mhm.
for my I have a podcast platform. I take all that
Yeah.
awesome social content that you just told me about that I can't wait to drop into this like giant manuscript of us, and I'll give your episode second life. By the way, the first
Yeah,
thing I'll
right.
do is a featured podcaster article that I know is going to help set us up from a Google perspective, so Google knows
Mhm.
we exist. Also, is your podcast on IMDb?
No.
So here's something to think of. So in this world of link backs, and I want to be just mindful of throwing too much out, and but this is a big one, by the way. TV shows, films. We know that IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, is the place where we can go to check out who made our favorite movies, what actors are in our favorite movies.
Right.
It's a place where intellectual property and people who create intellectual property give and get credit. And
Mm,
podcast is an approved form of intellectual property on that platform. You can't consume the episodes, but you can give credit. And what you're doing is creating data that's fed from Amazon, because IMDb is owned by Amazon, to Google. I can guarantee you that you will have increased visibility in less than 2 weeks. If you
wow.
already have a podcast out there, by the way, I have a step-by-step guide. So everything I share, I have tactics. I have this like creator hub, and it's always free. And I have like 100 awards worthy of winning because people don't know how to win awards, and I like to show them. They say, I don't know how to get paid. I have a podcast. How do I get paid? I'm like, well, what creator marketing platforms are you on? And they're like, I'm not on any. I'm like, dude, you got to put your name on a list so that you can get discovered so people can say, that's the person. Pick
Right, but
them.
I think that is the hard part, right? Is when you're starting is like it's almost like you don't know what questions to ask.
Yeah, that's what I agree with you. And I'm, by the way, another Nick Cannon story is when Nick was doing the Wild and Out. I remember we were doing the contract for Wild and Out, and they said, well, how do we get more? And I said, well, I think that maybe MTV might reward you if you went past a certain threshold. So if we're supposed to get X and you got more than that, maybe they would say yes to that. I happen to
Mm,
know that they would say yes to that because I'd seen a couple of deals like that pass through. And if there's anything I could do as the middleman at MTV to keep that door open to opportunity, especially with someone like Nick Cannon,
mhm,
whose goal was never about get himself in the door. It was always you can't work with him and not pick up on the sense of community that comes around. And
mhm.
again, major players in media are like that. Those are the ones that have made tremendous impact and create Shark Tank and gigantic
Right.
genres of industry from media. But it comes from, I think of that often. And again, it's so funny, right? Like I always everyone thought he was just like such a funny kid. I'm like, he's so smart. He's so accurate.
Mm,
He's so laser focused. And for one way or another, I see it work out.
mhm. What were common traits you saw in people that made it in whether it was MTV or now?
That consistency of personality, that on camera, off camera kind of thing.
Ooh,
There's a
okay.
lot, there seemed to be a lot of that after 2010. I feel like a lot of like,
Uh-huh.
I'll say one thing in the room, then I'm going to go in the room and be a completely different person. And then
Yeah.
I think people who are quick to act and slow to change, that change is inevitable and change is
Mm,
constant, but it's also not something and it's something that I'm aware of and it's part of my system. But if someone throws new technology, new opportunity, a new uh, uh, platform my way, that I know I have a goal larger than creating content. The content is meant to inspire something larger. So you
yeah,
throwing a platform or an opportunity my way just challenges me to figure out how to take my message and use your
right,
platform. Because back then it was about airing. It was about distribution, right? So if you had an idea that was going to air, I had to
right.
figure out. So by the way, artists would have to come out with singles and solos so they could just get on late night shows so they can talk about same-sex marriage and equality and the things that like literally they care about and they leverage their fame to make impact on. And now, by the way, it's not even now. What's cool about right now is like we're in like social 2.0. Like we've
Mm,
all had some type of social media account that's on a publicly traded stock, owned company. So we know what it's like to let other people own our information. This taste of NFTs, this taste of crypto, Discord,
mhm.
Mastodon. Like there are some really cool decentralized social media
Yeah,
platforms, and
idea of
when it
ownership.
feels different. It really
Mhm.
does. It really feels different than
I'm pretty
what we've been
excited about it.
allowed. Yeah, right. It's weird, and we're gonna be mad that we called this social media because we got.
We did get. Cause like, the thing is, like, it's crazy, right? Like, you have
Social
no
media.
power on whatever you do. Um, you gotta be careful. You got this idea of free speech doesn't
Can't do this.
exist.
Can't do
You can't
that.
can't say
Exactly.
this, you can't do this. It's gotta be a certain way. You don't have rights to it at the very end, right? Like, the final
Yeah, a hundred
kicker.
percent rights. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
so, this idea of ownership would be really cool because I think amazing ideas could, like, blossom from it. You know, I feel like it's really early to tell which direction Web 3.0 would even go, but, some sort of idea of, like, I now have ownership of my podcast, but I wanna give, you part ownership of this episode because it was super cool and you wanted to do some cool stuff with it. Like, I think that would just create, like, a whole new community,
Yeah.
that's just gonna change the way social media is right now.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that's counter to the referral. Um, that like that whole this whole referral sort of. Yeah, I think there's something sort of like toxic about the referral piece right now because of the incentive for a short term gain versus
Mm,
exactly what you
right.
described. Which just got me excited because I was like, "Oh yeah, that's funny." Because I would totally be the guy in the room at A&E, and I'd be like, "No, we had this one episode where we did this. We talked about this. We should leverage that episode for like." I can see how that's what I was talking about with Nick. It's about being in the room, and knowing what other people have asked, and knowing what other people get, the capabilities, possibilities, and the
Actually, let me ask you this then. This just crossed my mind. Do you think, with this idea of, let's say in the future, this does happen, we all have ownership of our own material, no one can stop you, censor you, whatever, right? Do you think it would be overall better or worse with full free reign of content? Because, for example, from what I've heard is, different countries will restrict what content is made. For example, in certain Asian countries, they do restrict a lot of content, and a lot of the available content is educational only. But
Hmm.
in return, you're creating a society of people that are constantly learning. So, there's it's a double-sided sword, right? Which side are you choosing? But, so it's almost like freedom of
Yeah.
speech, or do we nudge the direction that culture is going? What do we do here?
I think either way, either step it is that we have to add responsibility to what we're creating. It's happening now on a public platform on networks. Like we hear Lifetime taking responsibility for getting R. Kelly behind bars. We hear I laugh. Oh gosh, I laugh, but like I remember the Janet Jackson Nipplegate thing that rocked MTV. I was there, and we had to, as a network, step up and be responsible and make sure that not only did we not put ourselves in a situation where something that wouldn't happen, but we had to then basically unfortunately redefine how we would approach showing the nipple on the network, and we had to be
Right.
responsible at a whole different level. Responsibility, especially with some of these silly reality TV shows. There's a lot of network responsibility of what leaves the air. There are some great conversations that spawn from Survivor and some of these big network shows. That's responsibility in action. And I got to be honest, it's late. It's 25 years later, we're finally being responsible because how many
Yeah.
lawsuits, how many firings,
We're
how
still not
many,
even there legally,
you know what I
like, the
mean?
court systems, all this stuff, right? We're still not even
So
up to date on.
it's funny
Yeah.
too. The media and the court systems are funny. I've worked on shows where you can't work on shows about cases because it could look like it's like the case only exists for the sake of media, and the
Mm.
case can get dismissed. There's
People act different on camera sometimes.
a lot of different rules. NBC won't talk to anyone who won't have anyone who's in a publicly traded office be on their shows. So it's like it's interesting when you start looking at it for lots of different reasons. But we need to figure out how we can be responsible. Like at the end, at the end of this, you might ask, how do people get in touch with you? I before I could show up as a guest, I spent hundreds of hours building my creator hub that
Mhm.
has awards to win and creator platforms that pay 60 podcast discovery networks that I think most people don't know about because they were just created globally. How to get the podcaster to think globally, not
Yeah.
just nationally. We know Spotify and Apple and Google, and we know what's rocking
Yeah, right.
here, but imagine the numbers, the people who speak English and understand English podcasts
Yeah.
globally. We're barely tapping it. And by the way, why? Exactly what you said, because of restrictions,
Right.
because of how media needs to be imported by those countries to ensure that they qualify. By the way, it's a completely different process. I love that you even brought that up because that ties it right back into to when you're owning your content, how you'll be able to leverage it, what you're ultimately leveraging. And the benefit of owning your content is being able to be the sole decider of if I if I can get this episode afterwards or not, and also the ads that are in it and the people that they support and the blogs that go on. Yeah, by the way, so after you finish your blog for your podcast, and then after you go to Google News and you get set up, then go to AdSense and just drop in like one ad in the sidebar and make a couple of
Uh-huh.
bucks that way. By the way, it's like it's the benefit of having a blog, especially if you're on
Yeah.
WordPress. It's so easy. And the weird thing about, and then here's why I say one, because it's really kind of, I mean, if you want to go crazy and become a goop, or some big, web thing, whatever, by all means, go for it. But when you're running ads, you get data, and you'd be amazed at what people who are listening to you are out to buy. That you think you're inspiring creativity, but what you're really doing is getting them to commit to launching this business. Because now they feel confident about getting on podcasts to talk about their new business. So to buy their business, they got to go get the office. So now you know what I mean? So it's really cool. I think about that nonlinear part of content all the time. And I had a really cool thing happen to me just this week. There's been a big podcast about Laguna Beach Back to the Beach is called, and it was a nice podcast, and it made some numbers and people who knew the show back on MTV. I got some nostalgia hit. And I turned on Netflix, and that show is now one of the featured shows on Netflix. I think it's really cool that 25 years later, I'm still getting credit on TV shows that are just now
That's
hitting
awesome.
Netflix. Like that's the non-linear part of media. That's what I believe about these podcasts. Yeah, I'll give
Yeah.
you my information. You can find me. It's gonna maybe change because I just said, I'm also on Be Real and Mastodon and Discord.
Right.
We can go on and on and on about, the ones that are growing. It's growing. The social media universe is growing. People say, what's the next Facebook? What's the next? It's out. What's the next TikTok? It's already out there. It's already, so there's
Yeah.
no questions to ask. It's about which one you want to be on. It's cool. It's the
No,
power of
I agree.
discoverability, how much control you have over getting discovered, where you show up, right? That's cool.
Right. And maybe I've realized this especially in the podcast space, but the power of your words and and how it can actually, like you were saying, impact people's lives. And for example, I have 3 series in my podcast, right? I do these guest ones like we're doing now, and I have a book series and one I call Small Talks, which is just like few minutes monologue, just ideas, sharing whatever I think. And for a while I was thinking like, uh, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about when I say this. As a creator, it's really hard to get feedback, especially because what I've started to notice is most people actually don't even know how to give feedback. Is another big part. But so I wasn't really getting feedback, and I was wondering, is this even working? Like, is this worth doing? Like the small talk part, right? I'm like, is this valuable? Is this kind of just should I scrap it? Try something different? And then one day, one random day, a few months later, um, a good friend of mine, she tells me, she's like, "I love your podcast. I listen to it all the time." I'm like, "Oh, thank you." And she's like, "Yeah, it actually really helped me uh, when I was at a hard point in my marriage." And I was like, wow, that is absolutely insane. Because I'm over here thinking, "Should I scrap it? Is anyone even, like, really hearing me out?" But to hear, like, someone say, like, "Yeah, that actually helped me," it's it's, um it's a nice feeling, like, the reciprocity of sharing your word and the power you can have.
Yeah. Yeah, people yeah, don't expect yourself in others, right? Just because you know how to give constructive criticism or can see growth or can say, "Hey, that flower needs a bigger pot and it needs to be in the sunlight,"
Yeah,
just because you can doesn't mean that people even can begin to understand how to process the results of what you've come up with, let alone like the media and content that's out there.
right.
Um, uh, by the way, that's where I think that being in some masterminds and community groups and like specifically in the podcast space where there is no shortage of opinions, but there's lots of
Yeah,
communities.
that's true.
Like that's where I'm actually part I actually, now that you're saying this, is actually yesterday I was the guy in the hot seat in my mastermind.
Oh.
And it's not a seat that I enjoyed and not a seat that I ever really find the need to be in. But
Mhm.
for that reason, I knew that I needed to be in the hot seat, and it was so cool to an exhilarating experience to learn from people who have one 25th the experience I have in content and double the experience and no experience and still get something out of all of them. It's systems and people that impacts what we're doing. Podcasting is a By the way, podcasting is a funny sport, not even a media. It's a medium. It's like it's the best of journalism and accounting and
Yeah,
publishing, and it's like we've taken the best of all industries
tech,
and even what
audio,
you just talked about when you
yeah,
talk
video
about like
testing.
NFT in the episode. I'm
Yeah,
like, oh yeah, you definitely
that'd be kinda cool, huh?
it's
Yeah.
valuable.
Uh-huh.
I find that
Yeah.
valuable. I agree on that.
Especially when you start thinking, like, these companies like Spotify are just funneling money into this future
Yeah.
of this
Wait,
medium.
if we own the same episodes, then like what we ultimately, by the way, think about this. You know how it's okay to repeat episodes repeat content on social media?
Mhm.
So then what we would do is basically like just like once a year, I'll
Just
play your
repeat that.
podcast, you
Yeah.
play this episode, I play this episode, you play this episode, and
Right.
then somehow the ads know who owns what, and we like maybe that's the future of how
Yeah.
some of those like long form collaborations really look like. That's what I mean. That's not that doesn't feel as scammy, to be
Mhm.
honest, as like that referral industry where it's like, hey, I got a mastermind and they'll pay you $200 if you can get me someone for $1,000. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's a weird incentive. I
That's
thought,
a
what?
word.
Why don't you tell me what you want to do? Like, wait,
Yeah.
what? Like, you're coming at me with like, you want me to do what for $200? Like, do all this work for? I just say it one more time. Like,
Yeah.
um,
That's
um,
hilarious.
it is what it is.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess I wanna, like, ask you maybe first, do you have anything else you wanna add before I ask you one last question?
Oh God, I
Or you think
mean, I can go on and on. So I
or
feel, we covered a lot in this. If
mm,
anything, I really believe if I could really drive two things home. One would be the power of podcast guesting. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. We were giving it the example earlier. There's really no other thing I'm doing more valuable. You and I just literally mapped out what
yeah, we
could
did.
be the future of
Yeah,
podcasting. That's why I get excited about being a guest on podcast. And I don't have to produce it. All I have to
yeah,
do is my homework, show up as my true, real, genuine, authentic self, which, by the way, I can do from the comfort of my home with these cameras. And now that
mhm.
1080, 4K, I'm so much more comfortable in my space than I was in a studio. Maybe that's why I never took the leap back
Oh,
then. And
yeah.
I feel much more comfortable doing it now this way. My palms aren't sweaty, feels normal. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And it's ours. And
yeah,
that's the other thing too. Like people who aren't prepared for podcasting, don't focus on the episode, focus on the person. If you don't feel
yeah.
right, then don't talk. By the way, it's not about the episode; it's about the person. If you feel like you don't know what to say, then find someone you knew how to talk to. Podmatch helped me do that. So if you want, check the show notes. The Podmatch link is a big one to tap on. And while you're checking out those show notes, since we now understand the biggest value that we can ask of you is to leave us a 5-star review and let us know exactly what it is that you're getting out of this podcast in your own unique way. I want to know. Leave that 5-star review because it's end of 2022. So I'm gonna be looking, so I'll know which group we are. I'm counting. I'll reach out to all y'all. 5-star review on what this unique episode. Let this be the episode that finally gets you to do that, right? But like share it, right? You heard how valuable it is to you don't have to remedy anything. You don't have to share the anecdote. You don't need to be, I don't know, Steven Spielberg or who's like a big reality, you don't have to be the Survivor producer. You don't have to be,
Right.
you know, Gina Murray or something like that to be
Yeah.
able to figure out who. I'm not asking you to tell how to tell them a better story. Tell them what you get out of
Mm,
this story, how it helps. And I will listen to a couple of episodes. I've only listened to one, but I will listen to a couple of more
yeah.
before I officially leave my mark because I just really appreciate the space and what you create and the way you approach dialogue and ultimately the craft that you have in networking and connecting with
Oh, thank you.
people and creating this
Mhm.
space for honesty and transparency. I see it in action.
Uh-huh.
It's awesome. I see it. It's like I have to point that out because like I'm a star finder. So when I see
Uh-huh.
that shine, I'm like, oh, I see you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I was gonna add, and I'm sure Nick Cannon feels exactly this, is, him like you, and like you were saying, maybe there is a slight intimidation of seeing this massive studio with lights and makeup crew, food crew, tech crew, like 50 people everywhere, everybody running around, walking. I don't know. I've never been. I'm just going off of, I guess, what I've seen in movies. But
Hundreds on the sets. There's hundreds of people on movie
I have
sets.
no
That's
idea.
like, wow. I thought
Yeah.
MTV was big with 50 people on TRL. When you go to those movie sets and it's like 200 people for a
Oh
4
my
minute
gosh,
scene, and I'm like, oh, you must have no
that's
pressure.
insane.
You must feel like you're just like 1/200th of a 13-minute moment. How lucky are you? Is it weird that I do the math on that?
uh,
How lucky are
but
you?
I mean, I guess what I'm saying is like, I think what's cool is when you create it on your own
Yeah.
and when you see it all coming together
Yeah.
slowly, and like we talked about with Nick, and when he started his Wild and Out thing, and I think that's mainly on YouTube, right?
Uh, no,
Or
now
is
I mean
it
MTV. Yeah.
MTV? And then they also
Oh yeah,
posted on
and YouTube
YouTube,
as
and
well. Yeah.
right, and it's just crazy that, like, because I mainly seen it from YouTube side,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it has a lot of views, and
Big.
him
By the way, you know
seeing
who
that.
else? Do you know who else recorded? Had to figure out how to record it on his own because it was better if he did it by himself and like didn't want to be seen as like a host or couldn't be misinterpreted as a VJ or something like that, but had to do it his own way. Ashton Kutcher on Punked.
Really?
Really, he'd be in
Huh,
a really. I don't. I was never in those rooms when he
right.
recorded them. It was never on my grid when he recorded them. They were always just delivered. I think they were just his way of stepping in and being able to create the space to just be him.
Huh.
That's cool. I didn't even think about that.
Mhm.
That is that when you figure out how to do it your way
Mhm.
comfortably, you're right.
And like you were saying, you can do it from the comfort of your home, and like we were talking about, I think it's important to keep being adaptable too, right? Like growing with the times, with the media, not necessarily trend hopping. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. If maybe if your goal is to get famous and chase the next thing, maybe, I don't know. But
Well, if you're chasing something, you're behind it. So, but yeah, it's like that's unfortunately what happened to MTV in 2008. But that's not my fault. Because like all these other
yeah.
stories are so good. That's what it's
Yeah,
about.
I mean, yeah, I think it's a great space. There's great outlook and great, what would you say, because you were talking about, I've been in this space for, because you were saying I've been in this space for a while, and I can start to see, just by seeing people and their work and all that stuff. What do you look for, based on your experience? What do you look for, and what can people do to stand out?
If you had
Mhm.
to look at a lineup of people and had to cast certain energy, I would certainly uh, you can certainly read who's
Mhm.
picking up on energy, who's giving out energy. So confidence, I think, a personal sense of style. To be really honest, there's a physical. You have to, people say, I don't know, what should I wear for this? What should I wear for that? My answer has been the same for everything, always. Wear however you want to be remembered. However you want to be remembered, wear that outfit because that's what they're going to have when it's all said and done. And if that doesn't help you figure out, and all that to
Yeah,
be said, it's
right.
clarity. It's clarity. As a network executive, you have a lot of meetings with people
Mhm.
who are just sort of generals and go-sees, and uh, I could tell you the ones that sort of tend to work out are the ones who say, "I'd love to be on news. I'd love to be a game show host that deals with something physical, or someone who has an understanding of what they react to and connect with the most, versus someone who says, I'm really versatile and I'll kind of do whatever you need me to do. And I'm happy to just be working. And for me, not to say that that's a
Right.
turnoff. I mean, there are big stars that just do that. But I don't work with them. That's all. There's like plenty of people that work with them. I'm just not one of those people
Mhm.
that wants to work with someone who only wants to be famous and isn't going to leverage that to make this world a better place
Mhm.
for so many reasons. And that's again why I believe in owning your content. People who understand the value of winning awards. I like
Right.
winning. I like winning awards because I like celebrating as a
Right.
group our wins. I like knowing that I've elevated a conversation to a point where we can win an award. Awards are something you can talk about at the dinner table. If you can talk about my show in the context of winning an award at the dinner table, then I won, because all I want you to do is talk about my show. And if me
Mhm.
winning an award is what I have to do to make you talk about it, then let me thank my mom and my dad. Let me get on that thank you
Mhm.
list. And I think that's important, to be honest. And there's some shame sometimes. Oh, we're not
Right.
worthy. We don't know if we're gonna win. We don't know if we're gonna lose.
Right.
I think there's no risk or harm in taking a chance. And again, that's why I'm passionate about making sure people know where to turn out of the gate as a creator or even listening to this podcast, I have over 100 awards and I've broken them down by categories. I think maybe only 50 of them are podcasts. There's about 20 video. There might be about 130 awards in there now. I keep adding more as I see them. Yeah. Yeah. That's all on the website inside the Creator Hub. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. That's vpe.tv/hub. It's a lot, huh? The world is like, it's data points, and it's cool when you think about, though, how much control you have over it. And I want to be mindful. I'm telling you, make all these data points. Once you make them, you can't take them back. So be really careful about what you tell Amazon. If you don't want Amazon to know what your birthday is, you shouldn't have an IMDb account that verifies your age, because Amazon has, and this has been in the courts, and many states have challenged this. And unfortunately, Amazon feels that because they are a publicly traded company, they have a right, they have an obligation to share the information that they have. And your age is just information that you uploaded and verified and put up there for maybe your Amazon account, not knowing that it would affect your
Oh, wow.
IMDb account, or maybe you gave your age to a different platform or a
Mhm.
different, news source that's also valid and is now a data point that shares. So like there used to
Right.
be this, I'm sensitive about ageism, especially
Right.
as a creative, because I know how important the aesthetic is. That number is something that is out there. So just to be forewarned, if there's sensitivity to that, make sure that you don't confirm your age
Yeah.
anywhere anymore on any platform, because that's a big data point that it's a good old demographic data point that every platform knows how to leverage to their advertisers. So that's why they love it so much.
Mhm. Right.
Right.
A and I think, and I get what you're saying because I think age doesn't justify a person's, maturity, their wisdom, their experiences, their personality even. So, uh, especially as someone, so like I always grew up surrounded by older people. My friends have always oftentimes every friend group always been the youngest person, which has its pluses, but also its minuses. You always get picked on as the youngest, right? But you also learn from everybody as the youngest. So for me, it was like very easy to pick up on more mature topics, more things that people relate to, and communicating and things like that. But
Would you rather
yeah,
get punched when you're expecting it or punched when you're not expecting it?
yeah,
At least you knew it was coming. You were
right.
prepared.
But being
Triple
young,
layer up. It works in your favor when you're 20 and you suddenly are supposed to know everything about social media. So people who don't understand technology are throwing you 60, 70, $80,000 out of college because they don't understand something, so they're willing to pay you to do it. And you're like, wait,
yeah,
I'm like accounting major. Why? I know, and I'm 23. Stop telling me to get on TikTok and make like TikTok, like, but it's funny how
yeah,
that works. That being said, I'm like a 45-year-old guy who, like, I'm like, the video games were new when I was a kid.
yeah, right.
Technology I grew with tech. I'm so lucky to say I'm 45. I grew with technology, though. When I was in college was when scanners were needed to get photos on websites, so I was that for everybody. I'm a master.
Hmm.
Back then, I think we even had to take our CDs and put them in our computers, and for Apple Music to, like, there was that whole process. And uh,
Yeah,
uh,
and I feel like, or I think my, generation or like people around
yeah,
my
yeah,
age
where you
were
had
some of the
control.
last
Yeah.
few years of to grow up with tech, but also not like sucked into it completely, right? So we still grew up where, right, there is still the notion of like, oh, you're too young for a phone. You got to wait till you're 16,
Wait,
18, like,
imagine being an 8-year-old with like a beeper. Beep 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 beep. Oh man, Samantha said 143. She's the man. Beep beep. I remember I got my pager when I was like 18. This then a year later, I think I got my cell phone when I was 19. Because I remember my mom being like, "Well, why would you need a cell phone? Who's going to call you?" I was like, "What do you? What? It's not about who's gonna call me. It's like, maybe, what if I want to call people? Yeah, right. I'm like, I want to call people on the. I want to call people on the weeknights and on the weekends.
Probably the carrier.
Yeah, yeah. You can still search for that, right? I
Right.
used to do that, but that's funny you even mentioned that. On MTV, when I would travel around,
Yeah.
I would bring so
And
I
you're
would
calling their home
grab
phone number.
the yellow book
Yeah,
is
the
it called?
landline.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like that. All of a sudden, that sounded like a weird thing, but I would grab the yellow books from any place where I would go. Yeah, so I would have like local information. When I came back to running VPE, one of the first things I did was put up all my yellow books, and it was really cool to look at like the access. And then like 2 years later, Facebook like. Right. So I took down all those contact. I took it down, and now they're like, and then I put up binders of housewives and single millionaires for Bravo
Yeah, yeah.
on there as well. I work for other networks too, but you work on a couple of projects that are loud and they'll stick with you for a while. So quickly. My highlight reel is in 4:3 standard definition. Like you can't even legally upload the footage of my content anymore on Instagram. It violates terms of service. It's like this must be at least 420. But you know what? The relationships of 4K. That's for sure. My podcast has been fun getting to go back and talk to them. I sat down with Ja Rule like 2 weeks ago. We talked about the power of collaboration. I have some cool podcast episodes coming out with Mandy Moore, and it's fun to go back and get to that I have the access to those people. And unlike, I didn't want to have 52 different celebrities on my podcast just to show that I have access. I want to show that I have real relationships. So I have the same people back over and over again. So swing by and say hi.
I always, yeah, for sure. I always find that the best, is when you can have reoccurring guests. I think they're actually some of the more, uh, fruitful conversations, not because, um, you know, just because of the person, but also you get more interactions and more chances to talk about different topics with them. So I think, as from an audience perspective, when I see that, in podcasts where people have guests come back, you often see it's easier to relate to them more. You get to see more sides of them, right? So total win there.
Also, for efficiency, I shoot my podcast 6 days a year. I shoot 8 episodes a day, 4 10-minute episodes with one
Yeah,
person.
yeah.
I have short episodes that I use as conversations. I go back and I continue to edit, and there's some posts for sure to be done on my podcast. But I figured out that if I
Wow.
have four consecutive conversations with someone like Mandy Moore, well, one on
Mhm.
LinkedIn on my newsletter article, I put her image as the thumbnail, and I share the same link every single week or every other day or however many times I wanna on my business page or my personal page. And I'm never pushing people off of LinkedIn. I'm pushing them to my newsletter, and her image is on that newsletter. So I'm more likely to get a subscriber to my
Mhm,
newsletter by using a newsletter link to promote my podcast. And what I do is I go to
mhm,
Spotify, I take the code and I embed the Spotify player into my news article on LinkedIn. And so that's how I'm able to have like
mhm.
um some consistency. And then for 4 weeks, I'm with the same person. I don't have to educate
Right.
you. It's a new episode. It's a new episode. No one cares. It's a new episode. No one cares. It's a new guest. They just care what are they going to get out of it, and I can kind of focus on it now. And then and it gives her lots of opportunities to pick and choose when to support it, as opposed to being like, oh,
Yeah,
she didn't support it at 2 o'clock on Tuesday when I launched. Gosh,
yeah.
how am I possibly going to get my number? Like those things that we do.
Yeah, and I would also add to that, because you talked a lot about shareability is probably one of the most important things here. Um, Figuring out very subtle ways that you can incorporate more sharing even in your content. So, for example, in your blog post, you talk about, let's say you talk to a guest and they talk about perseverance, and then you have another episode where you talk to a guest about perseverance. Then you could, in that blog, just be like, this reminded me of this great quote from this guest who also talked about perseverance, or some sort of relation there. And or even at the end of the blog, just be like, if you enjoyed this kind of content, there's similar episodes I've done here and there, and I think those are all great ways to just kind of, because you're also getting people that are already, because if they've read the blog, they're probably interested in whatever you're saying, so they'd be more likely to click on the other stuff. Yeah. But anyways, Vinny, I wanted to say thank you so much for being on Learn or Be Learned. I truly enjoyed this conversation. You are a very energetic and, because you said you're kind of an introvert,
Oh
right?
yeah. Well, when we're talking about my expertise, I'm in my home. I'm in my home zone now. So as long as I feel like I have something to offer, as long as I feel like I have something to offer, it's unfortunate, but when I
Yeah.
feel like I have nothing to offer, and there's some people listening to this who know how to help me through this, but this is where I. By the way, this is proof that you do not need to be perfect to be a podcast guest.
Mm.
Someone asked me, how come we don't work with a lot of coaches yet? I'm like, because I have a lot of them and I'm still in that headspace world where I'm
Yeah.
figuring,
Right.
yo, by the way,
Headspace.
20 years
Yeah.
old at MTV to 30, like I had zero, I had, what's it called when you don't believe you should be someplace? You have,
Like
yeah,
self
self doubt. I
doubt
had
or
zero. I didn't even know that existed until I was 40. Like I didn't. Everything creeped in 5 years ago for me when I left television and wanted to focus outside, and but didn't want to be seen as a disappointment or a failure from TV. What a weird. Imagine that I felt like I was a disappointment. But anyway, it's all part of my story. I'm glad I shared that because that's like super sensitive. But that's it. That's where it comes from.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, it's like I said, like earlier in the conversation, it takes a lot of humility to do this on your own, really,
Hmm.
because you have to be very self aware of, what you're doing, what your name is, why you're doing it. Because a lot of, like you said, I think what there's 4 million podcasts, but actively only a few hundred
Hmm.
thousand. So you got to know your why and why you're doing it.
Yeah, make sure it's
Yeah.
yours because it'll quickly become someone else's why if you let them.
Yeah.
If they say you've got a mic in
Hmm.
your hand or an output or an audience, trust me, that's the first thing they're going to do is try to figure out how to tap into your audience, and that's why
Right.
it's about the who are you doing it with. What did we cover in this conversation? I prepared. I'm prepared to talk about a lot of things. I was really excited to
Yeah.
connect with you, and I knew that
Oh,
coming.
thank you.
But we had talked in on email and beforehand.
Mhm.
We had created intentionality space. It allowed me to show up trusting where I didn't feel like
Yeah.
I wouldn't waste the listener's time listening to me
Yeah.
figure out if I should trust the host of their own show. Like that's insulting, by the way. It's so funny. I hear myself like I hear my grandma's mannerism. Like if my grandma Fran could talk about podcasting, I'd love. I got to figure it out. I should come up. I should do like
You
Medea,
should
but
do
for my
that. You
grandma.
should do yeah.
I'm gonna come up with something. Let me work on that. Thank you for this. I'm inspired. See, this is what happens. You change the alchemy. You change the direction. It changes the output. The input dictates the output.
Mhm.
Conversations will always affect the dialogue. So it's extremely
Yeah.
important to make sure you're responsible of the words you use, the questions you ask will yield
Yeah.
results based on the phrasing, the intentional or unintentional biases that may or may not exist of those questions. Those
Yeah.
are all little things that add up.
Also, like, after, beyond developing yourself, I think then you gotta find a community of like-minded people once you kind of figure
Yeah,
out, what space you're kind of in. Because like you said, like, I'm inspired too, so it's, and motivated, so
yeah,
it's really awesome when you get in, like, I'm sure you've experienced this before, when you're in, like, this group setting and everybody's, like, kind of in, like, this groove, like, getting ideas going and you're, like, getting kinda hyped up, right? So, yeah, community is super important
yeah.
too.
Well, when you're in flow, it's exciting. But when you're looking around, there's like 12, 15, 20 other people moving the same speed, same direction as you all hit the gas a little bit harder. To be honest, right? Like
Yeah,
you're in it. That's the I
yeah,
completely agree with you, and that's what I liked about these smaller podcast communities is like it allows me, I feel like, to sort of to tap in to a finite, a boundaried,
yeah,
creative group of people that we can have reciprocity and
yeah,
understanding and collaboration in the art of learning. And the best thing about aligning, and you reason why you need to find those like-minded people after self-discovery. By the way, if self-discovery, so I like to point, I have this thing, vpe.tv/fascinate. It's like the best test I've ever taken. It's not a personality test or like
Uh-huh.
16 personalities or NFT. It tells you how your audience may perceive you based on what you tell it you do. And for example, where I said
Mm,
earlier about power and passion, I'm sensitive about that. This is actually something I literally got from this test, which was a really,
mm,
I've been in the room where I'm like, oh, my passion is coming across as like, I just wanna, and that's not going to help me push this
yeah,
through. Oh, I need this to happen
right.
is going to be the tone that gets me kicked out of the building if I think that power, you know what I mean? So you be really
Yeah,
mind.
right.
So it was a huge, but how to fascinate is the name of the test. Sally Hogshead created it. I'll give you the link so it can be in Lincoln Notes. But
Yeah.
if after you understand how you're unique, how you can show up, finding like mindedness is important. Not just for the sake of community, of building community, but
Mhm.
for the sake of learning with community. And know that there are going to be new things that come out this month. Pinterest TV just launched. So the future of
Mm,
shoppable, tappable, long form, clickable, evergreen content. If you've been making YouTube shorts or Instagram reels, we have another place for you now to throw all of your vertical foot, and it's tappable. You can, after as you're watching it, click on your course and download it, click on your product and buy it. And that's so, but it's cool as long as you know what you want to do. Because I'm going to keep throwing new platforms, new tools at you. I promise you, that's life in this 3.0, 4.0, whatever world we're in now. There's going to be lots of newness. So you don't have to reinvent so much. You just have to figure out how you want to stay to the course and what how you can leverage these tools to best make noise, to make impact, not even noise
yeah,
anymore.
right. And I would add to that to always keep experimenting, right? Just
Yes.
because something works. I think often people get scared to experiment, especially when something starts
Yeah, if it
working,
works, it means
because
it's
it's like,
viable. Gas
yeah,
up.
right. So it's
Gasoline.
right. It's like,
Call me. This is this is what I do. I show with like a gallon of gasoline. I'm like, you got a match?
yeah, literally you gotta put
Yeah,
your foot on the gas once you find something that works and stay on the path. But it's okay to switch lanes.
yeah,
To keep experimenting, try this lane, try that lane, right? Like, and I think that's like we talked about earlier. That's like one of the
yeah.
biggest
Try lanes,
downfalls
try
of
media
people that
platforms,
talk
try
about.
different surfaces on media platforms, real store, all the DMs and absolutely. Absolutely, because I promise you, what works best for you is not going to be what works for everybody else. And even then, there are so many
Yeah,
different social media sites now that no one's social media ranking or the way we're leveraging our appearances on multiple platforms. It's like that weird flip book, with like the head and the shoe, and I'd
yeah,
be
yeah,
curious to see how much really aligns.
yeah. But anyways, Vinny, thank you so much for being here. This was awesome, and I would totally love to have you again
Yes,
at some point. But yeah, thank you all for listening, and everything will be in the show notes. So totally check that out. This was great to have you, man.
thank you.